The People's Pharmacy podcast is supported in part by CocoVia. CocoVia cocoflavanols support both cardiovascular health and cognitive function by promoting healthy blood flow, transporting oxygen and nutrients to vital organs and muscles, including your heart and brain.
CocoVia has just launched its Cardio Health Powder with 500 milligrams per serving in readily soluble powder form. This product is vegan, sugar-free, and comes in a dark chocolate flavor. In addition to 500 milligrams of pure cocoflavanols, Cardio Health Powder provides 3 grams of fiber and 30 milligrams of naturally occurring caffeine per serving.
For 1 week, CocoVia is offering listeners $10 off the purchase of any CocoVia product. Use the discount code PP10 when you check out at cocovia.com. This offer is good through September 10th, 2021. More information at cocovia.com. That's COCOA, V as in Victor, IA.com.
Have you ever been criticized unfairly? How did that make you feel? How do you react when you get angry? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Dr. Christian Conti has been helping people find the best way to manage their anger. His yield theory has proven helpful in family settings, for professional athletes, and even for prison inmates. Yet it's deceptively simple. Listen, validate, explore options.
How can we all benefit from Dr. Conti's approach when dealing with difficult coworkers, challenging family members, or customer service representatives who aren't helpful?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, a new way to confront conflict in an emotionally charged world.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, researchers have established that the vaccines against SARS-CoV-2 work very well. They rev up the immune system to recognize the virus. Then immune cells go into action, producing antibodies and preventing most infections. Doctors have been wondering, though, whether the vaccines also protect immunosuppressed individuals. Now a study published in the Annals of Internal Medicine strongly suggests that they do. The researchers recruited 133 people taking drugs to treat autoimmune diseases and 53 people to serve as controls. All the participants submitted blood samples before and after getting the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine. All the healthy volunteers and approximately 90% of those taking immune-suppressing drugs made measurable levels of antibodies against SARS-CoV-2. People on methotrexate or TNF inhibitors such as Enbrel, Humira, or Remicade did as well as the control group. However, those taking steroids or drugs that deplete B cells such as rituximab produced only 1/3 as much antibody as healthy people. Their lower levels of antibodies have led the CDC to recommend a 3rd shot for patients on such strong immune-suppressing drugs.
What we eat is linked to longevity. A careful analysis of 1 randomized controlled trial and 152 observational studies looked at dietary patterns and mortality. Altogether, these studies included more than 6 million adults who were followed up for many years. The scientists found remarkable consistency across studies. People who ate more vegetables, fruits, whole grains, fish, legumes, nuts, and poultry, using vegetable or olive oil rather than butter, were less likely to die from any cause during the follow-up time frame. On the other hand, those who consumed more red meat, high-fat dairy foods, refined grains, and sweets like cake, cookies, or candy were more likely to perish during the study period. The moral might be that you can't eat your cake and have it too.
Some heavy-hitter nutrition experts have crunched the numbers and determined that reducing the sugar content of packaged foods by just 20% could prevent a surprising number of cardiovascular deaths. The scientists modeled sugar reduction, including 40% less sugar in beverages. They calculated that this change in the food supply could prevent 2.5 million strokes and heart attacks and nearly 500,000 deaths due to vascular causes. Dr. Dariush Mozaffarian, one of the lead authors, concludes, "Our findings suggest it's time to implement a national program with voluntary sugar reduction targets, which can generate major improvements in health disparities, and healthcare spending in less than a decade."
How important is strict blood pressure control to prevent strokes, heart attacks, and other adverse cardiac events? A large randomized controlled trial from China confirms that getting systolic blood pressure under 130 makes a difference. Over 8,500 older adults were enrolled in this study. Half the volunteers were assigned to the intensive treatment group, while the other half got standard care. After a year, the average systolic blood pressure was 128 in the intensive care group and 135 in the standard care group. During the 3 years the study lasted, 3.5% of those under intensive treatment and 4.6% of those getting standard care experienced adverse cardiovascular events. That's a significant difference. There was no significant difference with respect to death, however.
Millions of people dream about early retirement. Reducing day-to-day work stress seems like it should be good for your health. But a new study found that Americans who continued to work until at least they are 67 had less cognitive impairment compared to those who retired earlier. The authors conclude, "Our findings suggest that postponed retirement is beneficial to cognitive function for all genders, races, ethnicities, educational levels, and regardless of professional or non-professional occupational status." And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
Have you ever been so angry that you could barely speak? When a situation or a person makes you that mad, you can't think straight. Your body reacts even if you try to pretend you're okay. How can you learn the best way to deal with anger?
To help us understand what to do, we're talking with Dr. Christian Conti. He's a certified domestic violence counselor and a level 5 anger management specialist. His yield theory training has generated successful results for family therapy, professional athletes, and violent criminals. In July 2015, he conducted the TEDx talk, "Why I Chose to Go to Prison." His new book is Walking Through Anger, a new design for confronting conflict in an emotionally charged world.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Christian Conti.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Conti, we live in, how do we even begin to describe it?
Angry times.
Absolutely. I mean, not only our country is divided, but it seems like the world is divided. I mean, whether it's at home, whether it's at work, whether it's at school, whether it's even like on the roads, there's so much anger out there. Can you tell us how we can begin to be part of the problem? Can you tell us how we can begin to be part of the solution rather than the problem?
Yes, and I don't think that was just a paraprax, which is what Freudian slips were originally called. He didn't call them me slips. I think that was a wonderful opening to have people recognize that we are a part of the problem. That's probably a wonderful place to start. Look, we can, in all the world, we can only control ourselves. So something I've learned, and this is fascinating, but after more than 20,000 hours of clinical experience working with people who are celebrities, elite athletes, people in maximum security prisons, people struggling in the worst kind of ways, and everyday people, I've come to the profound realization that in life, there are two kinds of people. Are you ready for this? There are people who have issues, and then there are dead people.
Okay.
So if we're alive, we have issues. We all do.
Would you tell us a little bit, please, about how your childhood experiences led you to becoming an expert on anger?
Yes, absolutely. So I grew up in of just phenomenal parents. My dad was an English professor before he turned to doing earth science, and he's taught for 40 years. His first 15 years in English literature, and the rest of his career in earth science. And my mom was an English teacher. And one day when I was kind of a haughty teenager, I remember saying to my dad, I didn't really, I loved mythology, I loved literature, like I just always had a passion for that, but I didn't quite get studying the earth. So I said to my dad one day, and a goofy teenager, I said, Dad, what is it that you like about studying rocks? And he looked at me and he said, well, if you're only going to live on one planet your entire life, don't you think you ought to get to know that planet? I thought, wow, that's phenomenal advice.
Yes,
and,
indeed.
It really is. And so when I was going through college and kind of lost and wasn't really sure what course of study to follow, I thought about my dad's advice, and then I thought about this with a little twist. I realized I'm only ever going to live with me my entire life, so why not get to know myself? And that kind of led me to studying psychology.
Well, your book is titled Walking Through Anger, which I find kind of fascinating because it seems to me that there are, well, of course, more than two kinds of people, but there are a lot of angry people out there. And then there are a lot of people who try to placate those angry people. And then there are people who just try to run away from any conflict at all. So if there's family gathering at the holidays and you know that Uncle Charlie is going to be there and you know that your politics are different from his politics, so everybody sort of goes, let's not talk about politics, okay? So let's run away from that problem. So how do you deal with these different kinds of folks because they're all around us?
Well, first of all, you're so right. Like they did studies where looking at brain scan images that show that if you even mention the word politics, the amygdala, two of them, light up. That's your center of your fight, flight, or freeze response. And what's fast, like you kind of detailed it perfectly. We want to go headstrong into it. We want to fight. We want to flee, or we just freeze up. So, yeah, this is an issue that is impacting everyone, but I think there's a better way rather than stuffing it down, playing games. And I want to tell you a little story about how my mom impacted what I do, because this kind of sets up, as I reflected, this is a big piece. So my mom told me when I was going into ninth grade, went to high school in the 80s, and the kids would circle up and get into fights, and in my high school I went to, it happened fairly frequently. Well, my mom was an English teacher for ninth graders, and as I was about to enter that high school, she looked at me and she said, I better never find out that you ever watched a fight. If you see a fight, you step in and you break it up. So much to the chagrin of my classmates, when there were fights and I was around, I'm jumping in, I'm breaking it up, because I said, hey, you don't want to face my mom when you go home later today. I'd rather face you guys saying stuff to me than my mom. So but the point of that was I learned early on to, when I see conflict, to go into it, not run away from it. But it's not a matter of going into it headstrong, thinking it's about being tough or that macho energy. Instead, it's saying I'm going to show up and I'm going to interact, but I'm going to find a way. And that's what I've spent my career doing, finding a way to help go right through what's happening. But instead of stuffing it down, putting it off, let's go right through it.
That sounds pretty hard. Can you give us an idea how we do that?
Yes. So if we are handling other people's anger, I created this concept called yield theory. And yield theory is it's really about connecting with people in the most conscious way possible. It's about leading with compassion, circumventing their fight or flight response, and speaking in ways that can actually be heard. And ultimately, it really boils down to doing three very simple to understand, not always easy to practice, things, and that is to listen, to validate, and explore options. So when you see Uncle Charlie and he's angry and he's talking about whatever's angering him, we have a tendency to hurry up and want to combat that, to argue against that, pound our chest and say, this is my side. But what if we were to really sit down and genuinely listen to him? Now, we all know that there is a difference between knowing something intellectually and being able to actually practice it. So I have kind of a funny story. I was speaking at this mental health convention. There were 500 people there that specialize in this field, and I was talking about yield theory. And at the break, a woman came up to me, and she was really condescending and pejorative, and she looked at me and she said, "That's it, your big theory, it's 3 things." And I said, yeah, but if you think about it, all Bruce Lee ever did was move, block, and hit, and he did pretty well for himself. So I don't think it's a matter of being complex. It's a matter of being able to practice it until you can actually master it.
Well, Terry is a black belt in karate, so she really can understand and appreciate what you're talking about.
Oh, I love that. I love that. It takes a lot of discipline to get there.
Absolutely does. And I think that it takes a lot of discipline to learn how to actually, even at the starting point, listen to other people, really listen to them instead of listening with half your ear and the rest of your brain engaged in what am I going to say and how am I going to combat this.
So I have a way of teaching listening that is meaningful for me. So my wife and I, we've been married 19 years. We have a beautiful daughter, Kaya. She's 14 now. But when she was 5 years old, I love my daughter. She's just the most peaceful being on the planet. I'm blessed to be her father. But when she was 5 years old, she came home from school and someone had handed her a pamphlet. And this pamphlet said it was about a religious belief that was different from our own. And it said, "This is the truth." And so my daughter said, this is true, right, Daddy? Because it says this is the truth. So I took her upstairs to her playroom, and I had her lie down on her stomach and close her eyes. And I put a big box in front of her. Now, remember, she's only 5 years old, so just very tiny. So I put this big box in front of her, and I put objects on each side of the box. When I had her open her eyes, she could only see one side of the box. And there happened to be a little pony there, My Little Pony character. So I said to her, "So what do you see, honey?" And she said, "My Little Pony." And I said, "Okay, is it true that there's a My Little Pony there?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Wonderful. Is it true that there's a My Little Pony on every side of the box?" She was really excited, and she said, "Yes." And so I scooted her over so she could see sides of the box. And on the other side of the box, I had a little book set up. So she said, "Oh, it's a book." I said, "That's okay. Is it still true that there's a pony on this other side?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Wonderful. So to that side, it is true that there is a pony there." She said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, let me ask you this now. Is it also true that there's a pony and a book on the other 2 sides of the box?" And only at 5 years old, my little girl said, "Now, Daddy, I don't know." And I said, that's it. When you can really learn to listen to people and understand that for the people who wrote the pamphlet and practice that way, that may very well be truth for them, but that doesn't necessarily tell the story of the entire box. And so I said, if we can learn to listen as though people are on the other side of the box, and we listen with humble curiosity, it radically shifts the way we listen.
You're listening to Dr. Christian Conti. He's a certified domestic violence counselor and has been certified a Level 5 anger management specialist by the National Anger Management Association. He's offered his yield theory training to professional athletes, violent criminals, and in the context of family therapy. In July 2015, he conducted the TEDx talk, Why I Chose to Go to Prison. His new book is Walking Through Anger, a new design for confronting conflict in an emotionally charged world.
After the break, we'll find out how to defuse the defensiveness and anger people may feel when they're subjected to criticism.
Is there a way to frame criticism so that people are more receptive?
How can you practice peace when you're angry? And what's the best solution to start before you get angry? Find out how to do that.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy podcast is sponsored in part by Kaya Biotics. KAYA Biotics offers the first probiotics which are both certified organic and hypoallergenic.
All probiotics are produced in Germany under laboratory conditions with high-quality ingredients and under strict regulatory oversight.
The 3 available formulas are created for very specific purposes, such as strengthening the immune system, fighting yeast infections, and helping with weight loss.
To learn more about Kaya Biotics probiotics and the important topic of gut health, you can visit their website, KayaBiotics.com. That's KAYA Biotics.com. Use the discount code PEOPLE for $10 off your first purchase. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Mighty Muscadine grapeseed and skin products, natural supplements, juice, and snacks containing antioxidants that research indicates may support cardiovascular, immune system, and joint health. Information online, mightymuscadine.com.
And by CocoVia, the maker of high-potency coco-flavanol supplements that support cognitive and cardiovascular health. More information at CocoVia, that's CocoaVia, CocoVia.com.
Also by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Online at Verizana.com.
Today we're learning how to walk through anger. Family gatherings are wonderful, but they can also be opportunities for old conflicts to reemerge. Politics can be toxic around the dinner table. Are there strategies for managing anger more productively?
Our guest is Dr. Christian Conti. He's a professional counselor, a certified domestic violence counselor, and a Level 5 anger management specialist certified by the National Anger Management Association. He's offered his yield theory training to professional athletes, violent criminals, and in the context of family therapy. In July 2015, he conducted the TEDx talk, Why I Chose to Go to Prison. His new book is Walking Through Anger, a new design for confronting conflict in an emotionally charged world.
Dr. Conti, I think we've all had the experience of being criticized at one time or another in our life. None of us are perfect people. So whether it's a boss, a coworker, a child, a parent, a partner, somebody has found us maybe not performing up to their standards. So maybe we squeeze the toothpaste in the middle rather than roll it up from the end. Maybe, we missed a deadline when it was really important. And so when we're criticized, when we're told that we didn't live up to expectations, we often get defensive. And sometimes we even get angry. And we try to rebut that criticism. I think we've all experienced that. So we all know what it's like to be angry and upset when criticized. How do we defuse that?
Well, I think that's such a great question. And the reality is, this is a very profound statement. This is a profound truth. People see your actions, not your intentions. And the interesting thing is we tend to judge others on their actions, but judge ourselves on our intentions. And when people are giving criticism or feedback, they're giving criticism and feedback to what they see, not what you meant to do or didn't mean to do. But when you evaluate your own behavior, you evaluate it in terms of what you meant to do or didn't mean to do as well. So what I teach people about handling feedback, criticism, what people say, it's this. Most people in the world, unless they're really struggling with something intense, are open enough to say that as long as they're alive, they have more to learn. I think it's a pretty common statement. People will say, sure, I have more to learn. But the fascinating thing is the moment someone disagrees with us or criticizes us and sees something that we didn't see or want them to see, we get very defensive. But a moment prior, we might have acknowledged that, yes, we still have more to learn. And the truth is, if we really do believe we have more to learn, that goes for every situation, including if people see something different from what we intended. So when we attach ourselves to what we do, say, look, I am my thoughts. These are my thoughts. And someone disagrees with those thoughts, we get very defensive, like, wow, how dare you disagree with my thoughts? But if we come back to that philosophy that we still have more to learn and that we could learn something new in the next moment that could enlighten us and help us find a more effective path, then when people give us feedback, we can say, okay, that those were just thoughts I had. Those don't define me. I am more than my thoughts. I am more than my actions.
Well, Dr. Conte, that is terrific, and I really like that. There's a corollary also for the person who's offering criticism, and very often we don't follow through on it. Joe mentioned earlier that I did study karate, and I do hold a black belt. One of the things I most appreciated about my senseis as they were teaching me and the other karate students was that as they offered criticism, they would frequently start with something that we did correctly. And so your brain lights up and you say, oh, wow, sensei's like the way I did that kick. And then they say, but you might want to try pulling your toes back a little bit more. So then you have the criticism that comes in on the follow-up of something that you've done really well. I think it makes people much more receptive to the criticism.
It absolutely it does. That is a beautiful technique, and that is a great way. See, what yield theory is all about is circumventing people's fight or flight response and speaking in ways that can actually be heard. So it's not enough to just say, well, I told you you were doing it wrong. It's saying, how can I say it in a way that will actually get through to the person with whom I'm communicating? And so this is, but when I'm going to come back to that non-attachment for a minute. One of the things I teach coaches to do, I do a lot of work with athletes, and if a coach has difficulty giving, I'll give you this clear example. A coach at a major college basketball program was having challenges giving his players feedback because his players seemed to get very defensive and take what he was saying personally. So I was sitting in his office talking with him, and I had a water bottle with me. And I said, Coach, if let's say this water bottle represents their basketball performance. Now, if they're holding on to that basketball performance and you disagree with that, they're going to take that very personally. But if you could simply take this water bottle, push it away from your body, look at them and say, listen, I brought you here because I love you, the person. I believe in you, the person. But this water bottle represents feedback about your performance. And today, all I'm going to do is give you feedback about your performance. And my hope is that you really hear that I think the world of you as a person, but my job is to help you learn about this performance. So we separate the person from the performance, and then people are more likely to be receptive to what you have to say.
Absolutely.
One of the things that you have done that very few other people have even imagined possible, and that is you have gone into prisons where there are some of the most incorrigible inmates. I mean, people who have committed murder. And you have worked with them around the concept of yield therapy, of your whole approach, the idea of walking through anger. I'm having a hard time imagining how that would be received in a prison. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and perhaps some of the people you interacted with? Yes, definitely.
Look, when I said that statement at the onset about two kinds of people with issues and dead people, I mean that. We're all in this life together. And so some people made mistakes that are horrific, awful, really hurtful to others. But I'm very passionate about saying that as long as people are alive, there is an opportunity to change direction. That doesn't mean necessarily open the door and say, here, you're ready to go, but you still have tremendous value in this world. So when I walk in, first of all, I'm 6 feet, 250-pound bald guy with tattoos and a beard, and Most people would say I look like everybody else at a biker bar. So I know that, and I'm not pretentious, so I kind of dress in jeans and a T-shirt. I go in, and a lot of times in prison, inmates will identify if you're a fraud in 2 seconds, less than 2 seconds, because you've got to be authentic. So when I go in, I think people sense that authenticity in me, that, look, I'm here to try to help you find a sense of peace, whatever that might look like for you. So when I go into these prisons, there's resistance. There's usually resistance at first from officers, because I go in and I'll help train officers and I'll work with inmates, and there'll be resistance from inmates. Who are you? And same thing. But one of the most beautiful things that we see is that once we get past the projections of what I am or what I'm supposed to be or what they think I'm supposed to say, we have some of the most genuine, authentic interactions that I can imagine. It becomes very well received. And it's not about giving in or giving somebody something. It's about being present with people. I'm present for every inmate I'm speaking with. That means looking them in the eyes, listening, validating, exploring options with them. And it means not coming in with judgment. And I can't tell you how radical that changes things. So that, some of these experiences, I can tell you some really powerful stories from the prison.
Well, I'd like to hear them, because I imagine some of these guys are really angry. And it's not just, male prisoners. There are a lot of female prisoners who are really angry too. And how do you get past that resistance, that anger? How do you bring yield theory into a prison?
Wonderful question. So, and I spent 6 months in a women's maximum security prison last year. There's anger everywhere. So I'll give you an example. So I started this movement in a prison I was in recently. I spent 4 months in this prison. And the movement was, look, I spoke to a group of inmates, and they said, can you go block to block and let everybody know what you're about? Because people don't know, and I think people need to hear this message. So I did that. I went block to block. And I thought, when you walk into this block, now imagine you're in a maximum security prison. Some guys are playing dice. Some guys are playing checkers. Television's on. People are doing their thing in their social time. And some stranger walks in jeans and T-shirt, shuts off so it's not a suit and tie. So you're wondering, is this person an expert? Why is he shutting off the television? Shuts off the television and say, hey, guys, I want to talk to you for a little bit about what I'm doing. And I said, when I started this movement, it was predicated on 3 things. So I said, what I want you to do is this. Imagine in your final moments of life, when we're all going to have those moments, or if you've ever sat with someone in hospice, what do people want? They don't sit back and reflect and think, I wish I would have gotten over on this person. I wish I would have gotten away with this. Instead, they think, I want peace. Now, we know this. If we want peace, we can't wait till the last moment to start practicing it. So the movement was based on 3 things. 1, inner peace. If we want inner peace, we've got to practice it. 2, education. And this was about, I would love for you to learn whatever book type knowledge you want, but also personal growth. And 3, legacy. The past is gone. We can't change a second of it. The future is of yet unwritten. All we have is the present moment. So I said, I want you to start working on your legacy from this moment forward. So now we have some buy-in. I mean, we're talking about, these were powerful moments where guys were coming up, first of all, quieting themselves down to listen. And then what I did was I made this whole movement about inspiring them to start to strive for these things. I said, you don't go into a coffee shop and say, I'm thirsty, because if you do, they're going to say, well, what do you want? And the same is true in life. If we all know we're going to want peace, we can't wait. So the information I have resonates with them. For instance, one guy, I was telling them, I want you guys to start to direct the energy of this institution rather than allowing these young guys who are involved in these gangs, letting them determine the energy. I mean, when we were young, we've all done stupid things. We wouldn't pick ourselves to be the ones who are leading a situation when we're young and foolish. So I said, why not have this led by guys who have some life wisdom? And, I wanted them to start teaching classes and things like that. I remember one time, so this group of 5 or 6 inmates came up to me afterward, and one guy kept really challenging me. He said, listen, we need to be the ones who are creating these classes, and we need to be the ones who are doing these mentoring programs. Meanwhile, this is the exact message I had been speaking about. So I said to him, so there's a group of inmates around, and I said to them, Guy comes out of the desert and he's so thirsty. And he says, man, I'm so thirsty. And there's a guy standing there with a fresh bucket of water and says, here you go, here's some water. And he's like, I don't need that, I need water. And he's like, here you go, I don't need that, I need water. And he's just missing that it's right in front of him. Well, all the other inmates around that circle, they started going, oh boy, he's literally telling you the very same thing. And this guy was missing it until one of the other inmates grabbed him and he said, he's telling you we are going to be the ones who are creating this stuff. We're going to be the ones working toward mentoring and things like that. So it's kind of interesting. I try to use creative stories to meet people where they are. But this was like this movement is very powerful. This inner peace, education, and legacy. And if I can, I just want to tell you one more thing about what happened from this, because this is really fascinating. So I walked onto death row. And when I walked onto death row, I said to the guard, could you open up the doors? I'd like to talk to the guys. And he said, oh, okay. And I said, no, I'm serious. I'd like to talk to the guys. We'll have them come out. He said, unrestrained. And I said, yeah, unrestrained. Just open the doors. I'm having them to come down to these tables and I'd like to talk to them. And he said, okay. So he calls up to the bubble where they would open the doors. And he said, Doc wants the doors open. The guy goes, are you serious? Over the speaker. And he said, yes, he's serious. So he opens up the door. On the first row, on the first unit of death row I went to with this, only 4 guys came out. Because in a prison, when doors just open and they don't know why, they're not ready to just willingly come out. But I'll tell you this, the second block I went to, because word often travels faster in a prison than with cell phones because they can talk through pipes. The second block I went to, every guy came out. So now imagine this. You're standing in death row. There's no one who's restrained. They're coming down to the tables, and you're just talking on the fly, telling them about this movement. So I said to the guys this, look, if I gave each and every one of you a bucket right now, what would you put in your bucket? And one of the guys said, food. I said, great. That means you'd have food in your bucket, right? Right. I looked at another guy. Big guy. We're talking death row inmate. I said to him, if I gave you a bucket, what are you putting in it? He said, my cellie's head. I said, okay. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, I think I understand why you're on death row. And then, my message to them was this: whatever you put in your bucket will be in your bucket. And the same is true of your mind. Whatever you put in your mind will be in your mind. If you fill your mind with violence, violence will be in your mind. If you watch violent movies or you listen to violent music, you're going to have violence in your mind. So even the guy who said he wanted his cellie's head in the bucket, he shook his head and said, yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. So I said to him, as I'm walking away, I was thinking, I don't know what was more concerning, that he wanted to have his cellmate's head in his bucket, or the fact on death row they're single-celled, so he doesn't have a cellie.
Right.
My point, though, is if we want peace, we've got to practice it. We've got to fill our minds with what we want to be in our minds.
Now, if somebody feels angry, it may be very hard to practice peace in that moment. What do you suggest?
Well, there was a warthog in the woods, and he was sharpening his tusks. And a little rabbit came by, and the rabbit said, why are you sharpening your tusks? And the warthog said, and the rabbit said, he interrupted. He said, I don't know why you're sharpening them. I've been all through the woods, and I haven't seen not one hunter out today. There's not one hunter. And the warthog said, if I wait until I see a hunter, it'll be too late to sharpen my tusks. I think one of the biggest barriers to people understanding anger management is they tend to wait to start to even begin to think about practicing self-control once they're already angry. And what I try to help spread conscious education around is we can start practicing anger management before we're angry, and that comes back to our self-talk.
You're listening to Dr. Christian Conti. He's a certified domestic violence counselor and a Level 5 anger management specialist certified by the National Anger Management Association. His new book is Walking Through Anger, a new design for confronting conflict in an emotionally charged world.
After the break, we'll find out about people who may be angry without really even knowing why.
Intense emotions like anger can be scary, but they have a beginning, middle, and end. Consequently, you can walk through anger.
How do people learn to really listen instead of just formulating a response?
Is there a way to put ourselves in someone else's shoes when they challenge us or attack our values?
What does Dr. Conti mean by authenticity?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. This podcast is brought to you by the Verrazana Health Club. This comprehensive home testing service enables you to track crucial health markers of gut health, inflammation, metabolism, hormones, thyroid function, and many other organ systems. Regular testing can help detect health imbalances before they lead to sickness. Online at Verrazana, verizana.com/health-club. Get 50% off the first month with the discount code PEOPLE50.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Cocoa Via, offering plant-based nutrients in the form of cocoa flavanols for brain and heart health. Online at cocovia.com.
And by Kaya Biotics, probiotic products made in Germany from certified organic ingredients. KAYA Biotics.com.
Also by Mighty Muscadine grapeseed and skin products, natural supplements, juice, and snacks containing antioxidants that research indicates may support cardiovascular, immune system, and joint health. Information online, mightymuscadine.com.
We're talking today about the best way to manage anger. In contentious times, skills to defuse rage, your own or someone else's, can be very helpful. How can you do that?
Our guest is Dr. Christian Conti. He's a certified domestic violence counselor and a Level 5 anger management specialist. His new book is Walking Through Anger, a new design for confronting conflict in an emotionally charged world.
Dr. Conti, you've studied anger and people who are angry for a long time, and I wonder if there are some people who get angry and they don't even know why.
Yes, 100% there are. Look, cognitive behavioral therapy has taught us well that our thoughts impact our feelings, our body, our physiology. So if I say to myself, this situation's awful, it's terrible, I can't stand it, and it's really just a long line at a grocery store, we're probably going to amp ourselves up more than we need to be. I love that, and I definitely infuse cognitive behavioral therapy into my work. But there is something else, and that is this. Our mind always wants to match our body. So if you can imagine that we might down 3 energy drinks really quickly. Physiologically, our heart's going to start to race. Our body might even shake. And we will mimic anxiety. Now, once we're feeling physiologically anxious and we don't know why, we start to create a story in our minds to match that. So busy people might say, did I forget that deadline? Oh, I was supposed to be here. I was supposed to be there. And then, of course, that story triggers more cortisol, adrenaline, and the cycle continues. The reality is that there are many times that we are angry because physiologically something's off, and anger feels better than many other things. So, for instance, there's something called the cycle of shame. And here's what it is. Shame is the lowest form of consciousness. When people live in shame, they act out of shame. If I feel like I'm no good, then why not hurt someone else? Above shame, and there are only just 4 or 5 that I want to tell you about. Above shame is depression. Anyone out there who's ever struggled with depression understands, gosh, it can feel so heavy. You can feel like, I can't move. I can't do the things I want to do. Now, above depression, and this is what's called a scale of consciousness. So we're talking about levels of consciousness. Above that is anxiety. Now, anxiety is that awful feeling where, it's really difficult to struggle with anxiety. But let me come back to this is the main piece. Above shame, above depression, and above anxiety is anger. In other words, we would rather lash out in anger than be dwelling in shame, depression, or anxiety. The problem is when we lash out in anger, the physiology is this, when we lash out, our brain is flooded with endorphins. So momentarily it feels better and we're out of that chaos of the awful feeling of, let's say, too much cortisol. Now, once we lash out, we feel bad, which then puts us right back into that shame aspect. So very often people come to me and they're struggling with anger and they don't know why. And we uncover that it has to do with shame, depression, anxiety. It's easier to lash out than it is to sit in that emotion and recognize that no matter what the emotion is, it will have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Beginning, middle, and end, that's an important piece of managing anger, because if it's not going to last forever, you could, as you so eloquently put it, walk through it.
Well, that's it. You're right. There's a place west of Casper, Wyoming that's called, when the explorers found it, this was really difficult terrain to pass. So they're like, well, this is so hard to get through. It was nearly impassable, but what's nearly impassable is possible. And they were able to get through it. They ended up calling it Hell's Half Acre. And I think that's a wonderful story for understanding that sometimes our emotions, something as intense as anger, can feel like Hell's Half Acre. But the good news is there will be a beginning to it, there will be a middle, and there will be an end. And whereas emotions come and go, actions cannot be undone. And so I try to shine light to help people be mindful that if they can almost become an observer of what's happening in them physiologically, they don't have to be reactive to it, and they can learn from it.
Dr. Conti, as a core part of your yield therapy, you give examples, and you already shared with us about your daughter and the box. Could you also tell us about the labyrinth, please?
So, yes, when my daughter was in second grade, yes, she was in second grade, she came home from school one day, and a little girl said something mean to her. And when I tell you my daughter's living peace, like, this is a little girl who's never missed a day of meditation since she was 6.5 years old. She's a very kind human being. So she really was kind of taken back by this. This is the first time she really experienced something. So this girl says something mean to her, and she says, Daddy, I don't know why she would do that. So I took her into our meditation room, and we have a glass coffee table in there. And at the time, second grade, I don't think how old she was, maybe 7, 8, whatever it is. And I said, I got down on a knee and I said, let's imagine that we're looking into this coffee table, and inside is an entire world. And this world is a labyrinth. It's a maze. And now imagine this. It's covered in complete darkness. Now, you and I have magic goggles on so we can see what's happening. And they see these little people down there, but they can't see each other because they're in complete darkness. I said, now let me ask you this. If we saw them bumping into each other, should we be mad at them for bumping into each other? And she said, no. And I said, why not? She said, well, Daddy, they just can't see each other. And I said, I think that's what happened with that little girl. I think when she acted out and said that not nice thing, she did that from a place not realizing the pain that she caused. This is a very powerful lesson, because specializing in working with people convicted of violent crimes, I've seen and heard things that I wouldn't even share with the world because I wouldn't want that in people's psyches. And the reality is, I still believe that people do that out of a place of being completely lost themselves. And when we can start to see that people are lashing out and doing hurtful things, even if it's directly to us, they're doing it because they're in a place of pain. They're lost in the darkness. Now, instead of jumping into the darkness with them, we can simply shine a light. The Buddha once said that anger will never be overcome by anger, but by love alone. And there is a very powerful truth to that if someone's angry and you respond in anger, you're just adding, now we have twice the anger. But if someone's angry and you can shine light, they'll not only just that amount of anger, but eventually it dissipates.
Dr. Conti, when two people are kind of facing off, they're in the middle of a heated argument, perhaps, one of those people, as they're sort of quote unquote listening to the other person, they're actually formulating their next response. So they're not really listening. They've just heard enough to get their hackles up, and they're formulating their response. How do you help people get past that? Let me figure out what I'm going to say in response to, I want to really listen to that person and maybe even let them know that I heard what they had to say?
Well, you're so right, and that is so often how communication goes. People just wait till the other person stops talking, and what I try to help people see, I visualize myself holding up a mirror for people and having them see, like, what is your actual goal? If your goal is to have the other person really see your perspective, then my question for you is what you're doing working, is what you're doing getting you toward your goal. So, for instance, I was working with an NBA player recently who said, I see myself, when he said, when you taught people see your actions, not your intentions, he said, I realized that people are seeing kind of a hothead at times and I'm lashing out and I want my teammate to be fired up and I go off on him. And I said, so your goal is to get them to do what? And he's like, well, to be motivated, to recognize the importance of the moment. And I said, is the approach you're taking getting you that result? He said, no. And I said, so that would be akin to, let's say, a martial artist with Terry. Let's think about this. If you're throwing a hook and that hook is simply being blocked, ducked every time and countered, at some point your trainer is going to say, I'm going to advise you not to throw the hook and instead throw an overhand right. Do something different.
Right, because if what you're doing isn't working, you don't want to keep doing it.
Exactly. So I would say to people who are communicating in that way, if you want to stand on a soapbox, beat your chest, and allow your ego to say that you have the answers, you're right, then that's wonderful. You're not going to convince people. You're not going to convince the person with whom you're speaking, but you'll get to walk away and say, well, I told him, and your ego gets stroked, but you didn't actually make a difference. You didn't change anything. You didn't impact anyone. If anything, you probably had that person become more attached to their perspective.
Dr. Conti, I really need some concrete help here, because I know that we have listeners who feel very passionate about some things. It may be their work. It may be their hobby. It may be politics. And so when somebody perhaps challenges their politics or disagrees with their politics or finds their work inadequate or inappropriate, how do we help them somehow get past that defensiveness and that anger? You know, force fields up, lasers locked. We have a tendency to just shoot from the lip. And I'm wondering if there's some way that you can help us walk through the other person's shoes so that we can see their humanity rather than react to their words.
Yes. And first of all, I love your statement, shoot from the lip. That's fantastic. Here's what happens. We allow ourselves, we don't like arrogance. We don't like to be met with arrogance. But the reality is that when we proclaim that we know the other side of the box, that's acting from a place of arrogance. And if we could instead teach ourselves to learn to lead with humility and recognize that we really don't have all the pieces to the story. There's more to the story. So I try to teach people to think about how there's so much more to them than other people know. And then if you could start to visualize you're in behind the eyes of the person with whom you disagree, and you think about one thing led to the next in the story of everyone's life. There is a reason why people are in the position they're in, that they hold the perspectives that they hold. And unfortunately, what we do is, the way I told you there are two kinds of people, I believe there are two worlds we live in. One world is what I call the cartoon world, and that is the world of shoulds. Well, they should believe what I believe. They should see the side of the box that I see. And then there's the real world. They don't see the side of the box you see. They don't believe what you believe. And as long as you align your expectations with that cartoon world, you're going to find yourself extremely angry quickly. Well, they should believe this. But if you can learn to align your expectations with the reality that different people have different thoughts and different beliefs, and we're all still learning, and we all still could gain from having a wider perspective, now you're a little, not only more prepared for reality, but less angry, less intense. It's fascinating because I watched one time, I saw that there was a big, in Berkeley, California, they had this police tape up, and there were these two groups with opposing political sides. Both groups were equally screaming at each other. And it's fascinating because all you have this little tape. It's not like they actually was this giant wall. It's just literally tape. And they're screaming at each other. And fascinatingly enough, not one person from the other side of the group said, oh, after they get spit in their eye, wow, that's a great point. Now I'm going to be on your side. So there's a difference between talking just to talk, telling everybody you have the answers and they're wrong, and they just should see what you see, and then actually connecting. And I believe that the key to connecting is listening, like really understanding what led to what in the story of their lives. And the byproduct of that is then they are more open to what you have to say. But there's a caveat, and I really want to express it. If you only listen because your true goal is to have them hear you, then you're going to miss things on what they say.
Okay. And
that's the key.
That gets me to a previous question I didn't ask, which is, what do you mean by authenticity?
So there is a difference between what I would call the ego, who we think we are, the identity that we tend to have, and then essence, the core of who we are. If you think about it in terms of an iceberg, the part of the iceberg above the water, that would kind of be akin to ego. Sure, it's the center of our consciousness, the center of all of which we are aware, but that iceberg is far greater than that part that's exposed. Essence would be the center of the actual iceberg. So what I mean by authenticity is this. I mean, be genuine to the core of who you are. Karen Horney, who wrote Neurosis and Human Growth, I think she falls under Neo-Freudian, she said that the essence, our essence, is that alive, unique part of us that always strives to grow. Well, if we're to be truly authentic, that means that we open ourselves up to constant learning. And whereas so many people, guys, will say, oh, I'm open to learning, the moment someone disagrees with their philosophy, well, now I'm not open to learning. They're just wrong, and they just need to see what I see. And again, we jump into that cartoon world. But if we really want to find peace, it's wise to align our expectations with the reality of the real world. And it's wise to understand that people do see things differently. If we want them to see things differently, we got to meet them where they are, circumvent that fight or flight response, and shine light with what I would call conscious education.
Dr. Christian Conti, thank you ever so much for sharing all this with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here with you all. I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
You've been listening to Dr. Christian Conti, that's C-O-N-T-E. He's a certified domestic violence counselor and a Level 5 anger management specialist. He was certified by the National Anger Management Association. His yield theory training has generated successful results for family therapy, professional athletes, and violent criminals. In July 2015, he conducted the TEDx talk, Why I Chose to Go to Prison. His new book is Walking Through Anger, a new design for confronting conflict in an emotionally charged world.
And let me just remind you that the yield theory, although it's very powerful and hard to do, is also pretty simple. Just 3 steps. Listen, validate, explore options.
And that's really genuine listening, perhaps with humble curiosity and a recognition that we're still learning.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
To buy a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1190. That number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit the site, you can also share your thoughts about today's show. What works best for you when you feel angry? What have you done when you've interacted with someone else who was angry? How do you deal with people who have different political perspectives? What about family members who hold grudges? Please share your experience. You can add your comments at the end of the post about show number 1190.
You can also sign up for our free online newsletter or subscribe to the free podcast of the show. You'll never miss another episode, and you can share it with a friend. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week.